Hello and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guest today is Julie Deeks. Julie is a registered nutritional therapist specialising in menopause. She works both independently and with Sarah Davison, who you may remember as our homeopath from episode 15. When Julie first started experiencing night sweats, her GP sent her for a chest x-ray, admitting that his wife had those too. She tells us where she went from there and shares with us why all the food groups are good for us, the importance of sugar, and her pillars for managing hormones. She also shares her secret to restoring your energy. We met up so I could discover more. It is lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
You work with Sarah Davison, is that right?
Yes, I do, on her natural menopause programme.
I'd love to hear more about that. But first of all, a little bit about yourself.
I am a nutritional therapist. I've been a nutritional therapist qualified since 2009. So it's been quite a while. It was a decision made by my own experience of almost burnout on a number of occasions, working in the event industry and being very tired from working very hard and playing very hard. So I needed to make a big change because I didn't want to be doing that for the rest of my life because I knew it wasn't working for me. So I made a big change and re-studied and qualified, and then the rest was history really. And through that process I helped myself to have more energy and look better, feel better. I continue to work on myself on a regular basis.
As do we all, I'm sure.
As do we all, yes.
What drove you towards nutrition?
I think I'd always been interested in it, and I think only recently have I realised probably why is I have quite strong health anxieties and I don't want to get ill. And I think, as I say, it's a thing now that I realise that was probably what drove me to want to be healthier, because I wasn't comfortable not being well. No one's comfortable being well, are they? But I think my anxieties over my health probably drove it. And I see that a lot in my clients as well.
What do you see predominantly in terms of menopause? What are the overarching symptoms that women come to you with?
Yeah, they come to me mainly with sleep problems, the hot flushes, night sweats, low libido, and just generally feeling fairly miserable, whether it's to do with the menopausal symptoms or the fact that they've realised they're going through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can be quite difficult just accepting that that's happening.
It can also be quite difficult to unravel whether it is perimenopause or menopause or just life and the natural stresses of every day, whether it's work or family or a combination of the two. How do you go about addressing that to begin with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there are obviously a myriad of things that can be making us feel like that. But I think it is that perfect storm situation where, of course, we always will have life stressors. And, it's that time of our life, isn't it, when parents become more sick, our families are more demanding. So that adds a layer of stress on top of what's already happening. And then our hormones are slowly dropping or fast and fluctuating. So it is hard to decipher. So we have to look at it in separate areas and think, right, okay, so how can we manage all of those things, with what I do, which is diet, lifestyle, using supplementation, looking at biochemical imbalances, which could be caused by stress or the menopause or both. So yeah, it's quite a challenge. I do also use the Dutch test. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's
Yes.
the dried urine test for complete hormones. So that helps us understand what's happening with the hormones. It doesn't tell you if you're in menopause or not, but we pretty much have a good idea through looking at age and symptoms. But it does help us understand where your hormones are, how your body is removing the estrogens, and whether you've got good melatonin levels, and various other vitamin markers. So it gives us a really good snapshot of your stress hormones on top of your sex hormones, and how all of those are interplayed, because it looks at the different pathways rather than just looking at a blood test that is a snapshot of that moment in time. is much more helpful. And I think most women, well, every woman that's done that test with me has found it so helpful and therefore more easy to make changes that I recommend. And it gives them something to hang it on rather than just a guess.
Where would you start once you have all that information? What would be your first area to address?
Definitely looking at when they are eating and how much of the right balance of macros, your proteins, your fats, and your carbohydrates that they're eating. Because it's a really common thing, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, that women suddenly go on crazy fad diets and start doing crazy exercise around this time because we're trying to help ourselves and we think that's the right thing to do because we don't know that those things can actually make it worse. So if we suddenly start removing carbs, that can impact our gut health. And if we start removing proteins, and then we don't have the amino acids to make neurotransmitters, and then that has an impact. And if we cut out fat, then that impacts digestion and it impacts our gallbladder, and therefore we don't digest our foods properly. And I think the key is don't do anything really crazy at this time and start taking things out, changing things too much, or over exercise, because we're trying desperately to make something change and to feel better, but that isn't the right way. It needs to be done in a way that creates balance in our food, our lifestyle, and our diet to help the body to be balanced.
I'm still surprised at the lack of education in the real basic foundations of nutrition in school about carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and the benefits of them all. We need all the food groups. We need them for a reason, and it is to balance hormones for brain health, bone health, heart health, things that you might not be interested in when you're maybe 12 or 15, but to understand that all the food groups have a purpose is very, very basic. Do you find that there is any piece of knowledge that comes to you again, again, and again?
Yeah, don't cut out fat. It's amazing that study was brought out in the 70s to cut out fat and to have a low fat diet. It still seeps into kids of the age of 16 are thinking, oh no, I can't eat that, it's got fat in it. And that's food manufacturers' fault because they're still putting low fat, no fat on their products and then advertising them as a healthy option because it doesn't have any fat in it. So therefore you won't get fat. And that's obviously the exact opposite what's happening because they fill it with sugar and then the sugar causes insulin spikes and then your body then stores fat and then we put on weight. And then we're depleted of the fat and then we don't function properly.
So I have a couple of questions about sugar. Sugar seems to be demonized currently, often with good reason. But you never see somebody running to the supermarket to get a bag of sugar. It's always the combination, I find, of sugar and fat, which makes everything taste so good. And yet it's sugar, 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 sugar. Why do we crave it sometimes? And should we be cutting it out or should we just be limiting it?
It's a really good question. So when it comes to sugar and fat, the only natural way to get sugar and fat naturally in the world is through breast milk. Well, it doesn't come naturally together, ever, unless it's processed, like a donut or chocolate or ice cream. The most addictive substances in the world contain sugar and fat, and a little bit of salt. And the food manufacturers know that. It's mother's milk, basically. And that's why it's so good, because the body wants that. And when we're growing and we want comfort, that's the first thing that we're given when we're a baby is sugar and fat. So it's completely normal for our brain to crave that when we feel sad or if we're lonely or if something's gone wrong, have chocolate because that's comfort, and we should never beat ourselves up. It's like, have that chocolate. It's helping you feel better. But when it comes to sugar on its own, I always think of things like fruit juice, Coca-Cola, things like that. Now that is the worst way to have sugar because what happens is it goes straight into your stomach, straight into your bloodstream, sugar spike immediately. If you're having it with fat, you don't get the spike as much because the fat dampens it down, if that makes sense. Yes. So if you get a jelly baby, cover it in coconut oil and some nuts, you won't get a sugar spike as if you just had it on its own.
A bit of chocolate from time to time to make you feel better.
Yeah, it's okay. Fine. And it's great because, food is to be celebrated. It shouldn't be demonized. We shouldn't feel guilty to have it. And I think, around eating disorders and things like that, there's so much shame around the way people behave around food, and they're embarrassed. And it's like, no, it's okay to have some.
Hmm.
Nobody said you can't have that chocolate bar, but it probably isn't a great idea if you have six, but don't stop yourself from having one, because if you stop yourself having one, you will then have six.
Yeah.
And it's restriction that causes that craving, and then overeating is what usually happens for lots of people, not necessarily in a really terribly negative way, but we've all done it, haven't we? We said, oh no, I'm not going to have that cake, I'm not going to have that cake, and then all you think about is that cake, and then when you have the cake, you eat too much of the cake.
What is your own experience of the process of menopause so far?
Yes, that's really fascinating, because I didn't realize I was even in perimenopause back in my early 40s. I didn't know. I'd gone to the doctors. I had really bad night sweats. He'd done some tests. They all came back normal, allegedly. And he said, I really don't know what to do. He said, my wife gets these, and I don't know what it is. This was a while ago, obviously, this was 10 years ago. And he said, you know what, I'm going to send you for a chest x-ray to rule out sarcoidosis. Obviously, I didn't go for the chest x-ray because I thought that was crazy.
Hmm.
So I never went back to see that doctor again. So I had started my perimenopause. I was well into very early 40s, and I didn't realise. And I was in denial. Obviously, I didn't want to go through it because it's an accepting that I was getting older. My mum had gone through the menopause really young, but she smoked, so I figured that I wouldn't go through it young, but I clearly was. And my mum kept saying, it's the menopause. And I was like, no, it's not. But it was. And I did experience some horrible emotional stuff around with anxiety and how I was perceiving myself as I was getting older. I was really worried, and I then went to see Sarah, my homeopath, who I work with, and she really helped with the emotional side with the homeopathic remedies. It really made a difference, and that was when I realised I was probably perimenopausal. But I think so many women at that age are going through so many different things again, and then we've got this drop in hormone situation, and we feel too young for it to be happening because we think, oh, it should be happening in our 50s. But that menopause part that we never got talked about,
Hmm.
no one really knew about it, did they? It's just such a shock. Even now for women, I think, even though it's in the public eye now and people are talking and it's part of the conversation, I think it's still a shock, and I think we still are in slight denial about what's happening to us.
I keep falling into the trap of thinking everybody knows because in my little echo chamber, everybody is talking about it. But the
Mm.
more I talk about it further out, the less is known still. And
Yes.
people aren't aware. They don't know who to go to. They don't know how to address it. They don't know what's happening. And increasingly, the more people I talk to, it is that anxiety, the sense of bewilderment and confusion, often feeling like you're losing your mind, fluctuations in appetite, lack of sleep, which then exacerbates all the previous
Yeah.
symptoms that are so surprising. And as women perhaps are beginning to have babies later, many of them are postnatal and perimenopausal concurrently, which
Mm.
is never something that anybody really expects. And again,
Yeah.
then we go back to unpicking what's what, but I suppose that basically comes down to hormones again. You went to Sarah then to begin with,
Hmm.
and she helped with the emotional side. What else did you do to help yourself?
I did have acupuncture regularly. I was lucky enough to be able to go to my homeopath at the clinic I work at in Richmond, and she was amazing. And she really did make a difference to my stress, my overstimulated nervous system. It did make a difference, and also to my gut, because my gut decided to just slow down and I'm so bored with this, I'm just going to go to sleep for a couple of months. So that helped with stimulating my digestion and helping my stress levels, which obviously it's all connected, isn't it? If you're
Mm-hmm.
stressed, it has an impact on digestion and everything. So that really made a difference. And I did have to really think about my diet. My diet was already healthy, but I had reduced my carbohydrates quite a lot. So I had to think about what I was doing, and started to include more, complex carbohydrates into my diet so that my gut health improved. And do less of the crazy exercise and do more Pilates and more strengthening exercises rather than the cardio. So that made a big difference as well, because I think I was thrashing myself a bit, not really badly, not like every day, but I was. For my mental health, I exercise, so it was the obvious thing to keep doing it. But I think that did have a depleting effect on my body and my mood as well. Cortisol levels were probably all over the place at the time.
What are your pillars for well-being through this stage of life then for women?
So the pillars are literally, you have to manage your blood sugar. You have to learn how to do that. Whether you do some research or come and see somebody like me, it's the key. If your blood sugar is not stable, then your hormones will not be stable. Your cortisol levels will be difficult to manage. Your sleep will be worse. You will gain more weight. You will lose more muscle. Because your body is functioning in the wrong way because of that lack of estrogen and progesterone and your testosterone dropping. Improving your sleep and remembering that relaxation and rest is restorative, and we need to do that. And I think women of this age, whether they're in their 40s or 50s, the last thing that they have time to do is to do anything restorative. So it's making time, if that's an hour a week, to lie on the floor in the living room with the door shut and nobody interrupts you, then do that. It doesn't have to cost anything, and I find lying down during the day on the floor is just amazing. Try it. You don't have to even put the music on if you don't want to, but you can put like your headspace on, or whatever thing that can calm your mind is helpful. But just lying down for an hour, you don't even have to go to sleep, just lie there and just rest. It might sound crazy, but just try it.
It sounds blissful.
We must be able to find an hour a week and make it happen.
Put it in your diary, and as though it were an appointment, and keep it.
It's an appointment with yourself on the floor.
How would somebody know if their blood sugar is stable or not? And how would they go about stabilising it if they're uncertain?
Yeah, so some of the symptoms that you can experience if your blood sugar isn't stable is having fluctuations in energy, particularly around 2 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, craving lots of sugar, or even craving coffee, having to have lots of coffee. And then, of course, that will cause insulin spikes at the same time. Having that hangry feeling a lot, and just having very disrupted sleep can all be down to not having healthily balanced blood sugar. Yeah, cravings are one of the major things.
What are the simplest steps somebody can begin to take before they come and see you, for example, to address their blood sugar?
So making sure that, if you have got dysregulated blood sugar, the best thing to do is to eat breakfast, lunch and dinner. And I know people have these food rules that I don't eat breakfast because I get hungry really quickly. That's because the type of breakfast you've chosen is causing you to have a sugar spike. So have protein at breakfast. That should reduce that, unless you've got some kind of food sensitivity which could be causing that, but that's something that we would look into. So protein at breakfast. So it can be any kind of protein. It can be from nuts or seeds in your porridge, if you insist on having porridge, which is fairly unhelpful for most people's blood sugar. And then making sure there's protein, fat, fiber in your lunch. So that could be soup with a hard-boiled egg with some sourdough toast. And then in the evening, making sure again that your plate is balanced with those protein, fats and carbs. And don't overdo the protein. For sure, too much protein of course puts too much pressure on your kidneys and your liver. At this age we need to look after those.
Yes.
And have as much variety as you humanly can possibly have, and just have a very colourful plate. We've all heard of the rainbow on the plate. Take it to heart and think about how colourful your plate is. How many colours can you get on? It's hydrating. Hydration is so important as well in menopause, and if the more vegetables and fruit we eat, the more hydrated we will get, because it's basically 90% water. So if we start eating things like Weetabix, toast, pasta, There's not, if you juice that, there's no water. If you were to juice your meals, how much liquid is in there? You know, so if you have pasta with lots of pasta sauce and loads of vegetables, there's going to be a lot of water. But if you just have pasta with a bit of bacon, you know, there's not going to be a lot of water. So your body's going to have to compensate with drinking water. And that's every time of year, not just in the summer. You know, winter, we're indoors, we've got the central heating on. You know, that can be fairly dehydrating.
Are there any absolute no's?
Bad relationships. I think when it comes to food, I don't think anything should be avoided. It's the quantity in which we have it. Stopping anything, what would I say? I mean, I would say alcohol, but nobody wants to hear that. And obviously, again, you can have some alcohol without it causing you too many problems. So it is a balance, I think. I think it's removing some of the thoughts around that we should be restricting something, because it's all about the balance rather than the restriction.
Are there any supplements that you feel are important? Obviously, we want to get as much out of our actual food as possible, but do you feel they have a role?
They do. And again, it is a lot to do with digestion and how much we're absorbing from our food. So I'll always assess that with somebody that comes to see me. But if there was one thing that I would get every woman to do at any age, is to have milled flax seeds in their food. It helps to improve the estralobome, which is how the gut removes estrogen. So we have to detox estrogen that we make. We have to detox it. If we do not get it out of our liver, out of our bowel, into the toilet, it gets recirculated. So we might not make too much estrogen, but we can be having too much estrogen because it keeps recirculating. And it's that type of estrogen that causes all the terrible things that we hear about estrogen being negative. And that makes a big difference.
So it's not just the drop in hormones, it's what we do with them.
Mm-hmm. Whether you're on HRT or whether you've gone a natural route, we need to make sure that even at this stage of our lives, with a drop of estrogen, that we don't want to be recycling it. Uh-huh. We need to get it out. So having plenty of fibre, and the easiest way is to add milled flax seeds. 2 dessert spoons a day. Whether it's in soup or in your porridge, sprinkled on a salad. It contains zinc and iron, magnesium, lignans, which are anti-tumor. So it's like the most amazing thing that you can have. And it's not very expensive. It's very accessible. And you then don't have to keep worrying about anything else. I mean, varied diet is key. So I would, when we're talking about, dietary supplementation with tablets and things like that, B vitamins, complex B vitamin is always helpful because that helps us take the energy from our food. It helps with balancing our hormones and various other things, neurotransmitters. So if we're really stressed, we need more B vitamins. And then we're looking at magnesium as well, which we all know is helpful for relaxation. It's known as nature's sedative. We need it for 300 mechanisms in the body. So if we don't have enough of it, then it can have a major impact. Sleep, muscle contractions, converting various vitamins into hormones. So yeah, it's important. And you can do that by having Epsom salt baths. So again, it doesn't have to be a mega expensive journey.
Are there different magnesiums that have different purposes?
One I would avoid is magnesium oxide because we can't really absorb it. But all the others are fairly good and absorbable. But the biglycinate is particularly good for sleep.
Oh, that's really helpful, particularly if people are struggling with sleep, which seems to be very common indeed. What is your perception of menopause outside of the clinic?
Such a good question, because maybe 2 years ago, my friend, who's the same age as me, had sent a menopausal information sheet accidentally to her Facebook group, which included parents from her son's school. And she was so upset that she'd accidentally sent it because there were men on there, that she was embarrassed. She was trying everything to get it to remove it. And this was just 2 or 3 years ago. And she was embarrassed that they would think that she was going through the menopause. She was also going through a terrible time as well because of her job, and she ended up having to leave her job because she had severe anxiety and she couldn't cope with the stress, and she had to be signed off work. And that was all to do with the perimenopause. And I did mention it could be that, but she didn't want to believe it at the time. And now she thinks that was definitely perimenopause.
How would you like to change this?
I would love it to be part of the curriculum at school. So when we go through sex education, we talk about going through puberty and boys having those things happen to them, which are all positive for them. They get muscles, they start to feel sexy, and they start spending lots of time on their own. That kind of fun part for the boys. They go through all of that. They might get the odd spot, but their experience is fantastic. We then go through that. We end up having periods every month. Our boobs hurt. We have headaches. We can't do sport. We can't go swimming. We can, but it makes it much more difficult at that age when you're changing into a woman. It's much more negative for us. So I think that needs to change a little bit and make it more for the boys to understand that that's what we're going through. Because if they don't get it at that age, the boys, how are they going to get menopause?
Yeah.
So we need to be really open about our menstrual cycles and our flow and what we have to do and how we experience in that at that age. And that needs to be part of the curriculum so we can then go healthily into the menopause together, because men are excluded from the menopause. They don't even really understand what it is. And that's where the shame and the embarrassment comes, I think, for the women, because we then go back to how we experienced our puberty, which was through lots of shame and fear and embarrassment. So why wouldn't we feel like that now? Education and making women more equal to men at that very early stage in life, when we are learning about puberty, is really important.
For the men currently who have women in their lives, whether it's sisters, friends, wives, girlfriends, how can we help them?
I wrote something down earlier, and I wrote, our hormones are leaving us. Please don't join in. Because I think it's so common, isn't it, at this age, is that, women are going through this terrible state. We can explain it to our husbands, but again, they still have this weird preconception about, oh, it's your hormones, it's your monthly cycle, or you're pregnant and your hormones all over the place. They still don't really understand what the drop in hormones and how that affects our mood, and therefore it's normal. We can't control it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not us. I think they think we're crazy, and I think they're much more comfortable thinking we're crazy than it is something more naturally happening to us. For men, listen, be understanding, and just hug us. And if they need to learn about it, then just ask some questions, just basic questions. So how does that make you feel? And what's really happening? Is it because your hormones have gone, or can we help you get them back? Is there anything I can do? Somebody must have written a book for men about menopause by now. And if they haven't, then I think they should.
How do your and Sarah's joint programs work?
Thank you for asking. So Sarah will look at the lady homeopathically. She will go through all of her history, and she will work out all of the homeopathic support that she can provide, which is often emotional. It goes back a long way through various pathways of emotional stresses and any other imbalances that she can see. And then I do the analysis of the hormone test, and then I can then see from a functional level what's not going so well. We do sometimes do a thyroid test, because lots of women at menopause, they end up having a dysregulated thyroid as well. Mm-hmm. And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's last year, and since I've been working on that, because I now know that I needed to, my symptoms are a lot better. So we can therefore cover all the bases of some of their symptoms. I will then give them some ideas on what they should be eating more of, how regularly they need to be eating. And then it's all fairly different for each woman, because every woman has a different starting point on their nutritional knowledge as well as their nutritional balance. Mm-hmm. And how their lifestyle is put together. Somebody might have 6 children, somebody might have a disabled husband. We have to factor that in as well, making things much more easy for some people. Some people can cope with a more complicated food plan, if you like. And then if there are any supplementation areas that I believe that person needs, just by looking at that test, because it gives us an idea of their B12, glutathione, which is a major antioxidant, it gives us an idea on how much of that they need. So it gives us a really good balance, because we're looking at everything. It's not just me looking at nutrition, Sarah just looking at the homeopathic stuff that she can do, which obviously she can do a lot and I can do a lot, but if you put it all together, you've got a package which helps on more than one level. And I think the support that they get from us individually as well, so they get two types of therapeutic relationships as well. So they get to talk to me. I will obviously listen and behave differently to the way Sarah does, because we're two different humans. So they're getting different support as well, and I think that's really key too.
Even just being listened to is therapy in itself, and then to be helped and supported along the way sounds fantastic. Yeah. Where can they find you?
I have a Instagram account called Nutri Therapy where they can find me. I don't put too much up at the moment because I've been really busy and that's probably the best place. And I do offer free discovery calls as well, so that's really helpful because that gives us both an idea of whether we can work together. Mm-hmm. If there's a big monetary outlay, they need to be really sure that it's the right thing for them.
Is there anything you would like to add, Julie?
Yeah, I think, again, something you said earlier is that the menopause is coming, and it is. And I think when somebody is in their 30s or 40s, I know that's the last thing on their mind, but if they want to learn how to prevent some of the symptoms, the main thing would be eat in a healthy way. And I don't mean that by saying lots and lots of vegetables, but if you've got a bad relationship with food, really at that point, find somebody that can help you improve that and heal that for you. Because if you've got some form of disordered eating or eating disorder going into the menopause, it's going to be really difficult because it's going to send you emotionally into very different areas.
Thank you very much for your time, and it's been really lovely to meet you.
Thank you very much. Let's stay happy and healthy.
You can find Julie on Instagram at NutriTherapy, and I will put the details in the show notes. Send in your comments to Hattie, Hatty, at realmenopausetalk.com, as it's always lovely to hear your thoughts. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.